Good afternoon, everyone. Very pleased to join the European conference for the first time, actually. My name is Yasmin Meichtry. I'm Associate Director at the Olympic Foundation for Culture and Heritage in Lausanne, Switzerland. And my colleague and project partner, Jan Müller from the National Film Archive and Sound Archive of Australia joins me from the other side of the world where it is actually next day already, as it's past midnight there. And we will take you through the pilot project that the Olympic Foundation for Culture and Heritage and the National Film and Sound Archive of Australia conducted between October 2019 and October 2020. So aim for the pilot was to test to what extent DNA data storage could be a proven method to store video on synthetic DNA, given that we were of the opinion that synthetic DNA could prove a far more durable storage medium than current options. Never has this been done before. There have been some attempts with storing sound, notably by the Montreux Jazz Festival here in Switzerland, but storing video content on DNA would definitely be a world premiere. So the kickoff of this pilot took place in Hilversum, the Netherlands, at the YASA 2019 World Conference. Present on behalf of the OFCH are my colleagues Sabine Halle-Neumann and myself, and on behalf of the NFSA, Jan Müller and Ross Garrett. And here at this precise table, eating chips and drinking beer in good old times of physical encounters, we outlined the project deliverables and the contractual framework for our collaboration. And exactly 1 year after this kickoff, we presented the results of our pilot during a media event in Sydney. Plagued by bushfires in Australia and COVID-19 globally, this project quickly became a completely virtual one. The project team met on a weekly basis and worked via Skype and Teams. And even the concluding media event at the end of the project on September 25th was partly virtual, with the OFCH team and International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach joining from Switzerland, and there were speeches as well and presentations from Lausanne and Amsterdam. The starting point for this pilot was very clear. With the ever-increasing information in the digital world, effective ways to store enormous data with high reliability, capacity, and durability is, as most of you are aware, a major topic for discussion. Our transformation from analog to digital taught us that constant innovation is essential. In a 21st century dominated by the creation of data, knowledge is power. And in 2020, the world creates 47 zettabytes of data. That is roughly 8 million times the size of the digital archives of the NFSA and the IOC combined in just 1 year. And not far from now, within, let's say, 10 years, the world will produce more data than it actually can store. So for the OFCH and NFSA and for archives in general globally, data storage is a precondition. We're not teaching you anything here. It's our core business to safeguard our heritage. And if we can't store our data, then we'll lose parts of our precious collective memory. Traditional data storage systems require a large physical space to store data with magnitude of zettabytes. Another desirable characteristic of data storage is the long-term preservation duration. However, magnetic tape or optical data storage systems that currently hold digital files are only capable of storing data in tens of years due to the high tendency to deteriorate. And this creates a long-term storage and archiving issues for data. And we found out that biotech may have the solution: synthetic DNA. So the main research question that would define the criteria for our pilot project was pretty clear. Will DNA be the next thing for data storage? The prospects look very promising. 1 gram of DNA can hold 215 petabytes of data. And 215 petabytes of data is 215 million gigabytes, about 86 times as much as the human brain, or 20 times the size of the digital archives of the NFSA and the IOC combined in just 1 gram of DNA. Imagine, synthetic DNA could in principle store every bit of data ever recorded by humans in just one sea container. So here we will show you a very short video that outlines our project in a nutshell.
Data storage in itself is, I think, the biggest challenge for an audiovisual archive. Managing all these data means that we need to have the right skills, the right equipment, but also a future vision about what a digital archive will be. And it's about managing data rather than physical objects. And one of the topics was about storage and future storage solutions. For example, storage on synthetic DNA.
We found out that both NFSA and IOC have the same innovative approach towards these issues. And with the Sydney 2000 Games anniversary coming up, we thought it would be a good occasion to start a project on data preservation.
We wanted to use the 400-meter race of Cathy Freeman. If we want to store something on DNA, we would like to use something that is the DNA of the country. This is part of the collective memory of Australia.
So of course, if we manage to save that file and to retrieve it, this will be a big success.
We will suddenly see a whole new reality when it comes to the management of collections, the management of data. A lot of things that we need to do in order to make our collections accessible, we can do.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Yasmin, and hello. It's good to see you, and it's very good to be back in the Europeana community. As you could see in the clip, we decided to use the video of that incredible race that brought the country together on September the 25th in 2000 during the Sydney Olympic Games. We wanted to use heritage footage in our DNA pilot. That in itself is part of the DNA of both Australia and the Olympic Games. Actually, a nice metaphor to store DNA on DNA. We also knew that by the time the pilot would be ready, the 20th anniversary of Cathy Freeman's race would be forthcoming, which provided us with an interesting extra opportunity to create awareness for both the race and the fact that we would store that race forever in DNA. The video that we wanted to store on DNA is what you just saw. The race itself took 49.13 seconds, and we took a bit more space at the beginning and at the end, let's say 1 minute in total. Although both the Olympic Foundation for Culture and Heritage and the NFSA, in our case via our broadcast collection, held this heritage footage in our archives, we wanted to use the original footage that was digitized, and that came from the IOC archive in Lausanne, Switzerland. We shrunk approximately 1 gigabyte of footage to under 100 megabyte and used an H.264 file for storage on DNA. And H.264 is a popular standard for high definition digital video, and for a good reason. A codec based on the H.264 standard compresses video to roughly half the space of MPEG-2, which is the DVD standard, to deliver the same high quality video. So how does it all work, actually, storing on DNA? Well, the fact that I have blue eyes, brown hair, and a height of about 2 meters is all encoded in my personal DNA. It is nature's way of storing data. And in the last 5 to 6 years, we found out that we could also use it to store digital data. As Yasmin already said, our modern storage techniques have a few flaws. Hard drives and tape drives are not robust, have a low information density, and each medium requires a special device to read and write data. Given the amount of data we produce, robustness is a crucial factor for an archive. We don't want to lose information, we don't want to lose our collective memories. DNA, on the other hand, is very robust. You may remember that in 1991, the mummy of Ötzi the Iceman was found in the Alps. He died over 5,000 years ago, and yet we were still able to extract his DNA, read it, and find out that he was lactose intolerant and that he has still living relatives in Austria today. If Ötzi had been carrying a hard drive with him, we wouldn't be able to read it 30 years after his death, let alone 5,000 years. So you could say that DNA is nature's oldest and most robust storage media. It can last thousands of years. DNA also provides huge information density. Currently, as Yasmin already said, we can store 215 petabytes per gram of DNA, which means that we can, for example, replace Facebook's entire data center with just 5 grams of DNA. So this insane density allows us to store all of the world's data in a very small footprint. It also means that we don't have to choose what data we want to preserve for future generation. We can store all of it in DNA. So to give you an impression of the size and the density, a cubic millimeter of synthetic DNA, let's say the size of a grain of sand, could hold 200 times the whole digital Olympic and NFSA archives. This is how it looks like. So if we agree that DNA is the future of data storage, how do we actually store data in it? Traditionally, we store data in binary form, meaning with zeros and ones. In a hard drive, the zeros are represented by areas which aren't magnetized and the ones by areas which are. DNA instead is made up of 4 base components: adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. And this is actually where biology comes in. Also to refer to as A, T, C, and G. This means that we now have 4 distinct values instead of 2. So we have to rework our binary files. Instead of storing each 0 or 1 individually, we store them in pairs of 2, like what you see in the left upper part of this slide. Once we have that, we can encode the data into synthetic DNA. This is exactly like real DNA, but the only difference is that synthetic DNA is not stored inside a living cell, because this is what happens in the synthesis process, which is the secret of bioscience and the protected and patented knowledge of a company like Twist Bioscience in California, who produced the synthetic DNA for us. See parts 2 and 3 of the process in this slide. Now that data is stored, we want to be able to retrieve it as well, of course. See parts 4, 5, and 6 of this slide, and I will get back to that in a minute. So how does it all look like? In fact, we are using, as I said, biology to make technology. You saw how we started with a digital file of the video based on digital ones and zeros, and our bioscience partner packs the DNA and puts it into small glass beads. The DNA is stabilized in here like an artificial fossil. There are also options for storing the synthesized DNA. It can be attached to glass beads and encased in silica, or added to water, placed in a plastic tube and put into a -80 degrees freezer, or stored freeze-dried in a hermetically sealed tiny metal cylinder, which is what happened in our pilot, and I will show you later. DNA is not a human invention. It's been around since the beginning of life and has always had the same proportions. DNA readers, or sequencers as we call them, built today can read all DNA, even old DNA, like the one from Ötzi. Now that our data has been stored inside DNA, we can read it by using this DNA sequencer that you see here. This deconstructs the DNA and reads out all the A's, the T's, C's, and G's. And during the sequencing, the readers, big computers actually, translate it back into a sequence of zeros and ones, back to digital, in fact, which allows us to use it in a digital environment again. So it's actually very easy. So to summarize our findings, DNA storage is stable. It can last thousands of years. DNA storage has an extreme high density of information per volume and crucially reduces carbon footprint. Storing synthetic DNA does not come with power cost like big data warehouses are dealing with. And here on this slide, you can see indeed how our capsule looks like, a small metal cylinder.
And I'm taking over, and in this slide you can see how small it looks like. Which brings us to the conclusions of this pilot project. We definitely think the time is now ripe to consider DNA-based storage seriously and explore system designs, architectural implications, and standards. The pilot proved that we could write, store, and read a video using DNA technologies within a reasonable time frame. And apart from that, we found out that this project speaks to the imagination. The media was very interested in our story and in the possibilities provided by DNA data storage. There's something kind of magic about it, which is very interesting from a communication perspective. We really felt that this would interest the world, and we created a lot of media attention around the announcement of the pilot results. We deliberately chose the 25th of September to present the outcome of our pilot, exactly 20 years after Kathy Freeman won her gold medal at the Sydney 2000 Olympics. NFSA managed to get the Sydney Opera House as one of our partners, and they allowed us to project the retrieved DNA content on their iconic building. But the pilot indicated there are challenges as well, of course. A DNA storage system must overcome several issues. First, DNA synthesis and sequencing are far from perfect, with error rates on the order of 1%. Second, randomly accessing data in DNA-based storage is problematic, resulting in overall read latency that is much longer than write latency. And furthermore, existing work has provided only large block access, which means that to read even a single byte from storage, the entire DNA pool must be sequenced and decoded. And the costs are still relatively high, although it will decline rapidly over time, like every other technology after it becomes scalable. In our pilot, for instance, the cost for writing and storing on DNA was approximately $20,000 per gigabyte. And reading the data, called sequencing or data retrieval, is also still very expensive, approximately $5,000 per run, which is still way too high for reuse of archives like the ones of the NFSA or the IOC. Also, DNA is not rewritable yet. That means it can't update the information it holds without redoing the entire information storing process. And lastly, DNA does not allow random access either, meaning to access a particular part of the data stored, the entire stored information should be decoded. But as I said, the world was and is interested. Our media event on the anniversary of that magic Olympic and Australian moment generated a lot of media attention, television, radio, newspapers, and social media, but also the links to the websites of the International Olympic Committee, NFSA, and the Sydney Opera House created an audience of more than 3 million people, with an estimated media value of over $370,000. And from the pilot's perspectives, it was really, really great to see that the media understood the project and what was actually our key message. Heritage lives on forever with DNA data storage. And Jan, I head over to you for the conclusions.
And here we are with the conclusions, indeed. Thank you. So after we concluded the pilot, we defined the next steps, of course. So we said we will advance research and work with project partners in order to improve the process and to realize cost efficiencies that will lead to viable solutions in the near future. Also, we will be a member of the recently established DNA Data Storage Alliance, together with, among others, our Swiss knowledge partner EPFL and project partner NFSA and OFCH. One of the goals of that alliance will be to define storage standards that can be used by, for example, digital archives. DNA data storage will not completely replace disk drives or RAM anytime soon, because even with amazing writing and reading speeds, it will be nearly impossible to compete with the speed of technologies currently in use between, let's say, now and 3 years. But that's just a matter of time. Already soon, DNA could represent a great way to back up our data centers in a very sustainable way and store the massive amounts of data that do not need immediate access. According to IT giant Gartner, by 2024, 30% of digital businesses will mandate DNA storage trials, addressing the exponential growth of data poised to overwhelm existing storage technology. With this pilot, we took the fiction out of science fiction and stored world's first heritage video on DNA. We believe in its power and will, with our partners, continue improving the process. It is a matter of time indeed. We thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan and Yasmin. That was a very interesting presentation. It sounds like it's groundbreaking work. Maybe a question, if I could ask, is, as it is such groundbreaking work, where did the idea for this come from? Where did the whole project sort of begin?
Yasmin?
Yes, I can answer on that. Well, it's actually on our side at the IOC. We've been attending a few conferences, notably one on the time machine project. I guess you're familiar with that, led by the EPFL, and there was a presentation by the tech partner who actually uses and promotes this synthetic DNA technology. And there was this first pilot done with the Montreux Jazz Festival and the ETH-DED in Zurich and EPFL. And I found that super interesting, and I was wondering whether we could do that with images as well. And I think on the NFSA side as well, there were already discussions and contacts with the tech partners and other partners on that same topic. And eventually, as I explained, it was during that conference in Hilversum that we both shared our interests on this topic and decided to launch a pilot with video.
We've also had a question from Toba from the Brunsmuseet. Was IBM involved in the project?
No, they were not.
Okay. You spoke in the presentation of having a bioscience partner, and you both work for broadly cultural organizations. So maybe you could say a bit how it was to collaborate with a bioscience partner, which I guess thinks very differently to how cultural organizations think.
Yeah, well, it was a funny way to work with them actually, because as Yasmin said, it completely happened during COVID. So apart from the fact that we, the partners, NFSA and OFCH, didn't meet unless it was via screens. It was even more complicated with our bioscience partner in California because their labs were closed because of COVID as well. So there was a small window where they could do some work in their labs and could actually create that DNA for us in a very small time frame. So it was atypical, actually. It was not the way we actually thought it would work, but luckily they managed to create that DNA that we indeed transformed into synthetic DNA in only a small time frame. It lasted 6 weeks and was done in complete isolation. The few people that were allowed to enter the lab, also for other projects over there. And they managed to do it and send us the DNA, and that we could read. And that's another important part of the process. It's not just the synthetic DNA, the writing of it, but it's also the reading. Because if you want to retrieve the data, actually the data that we projected here, you can see it on this screen, on this slide here, the projection on the Sydney Opera House, that was based on the retrieved data, on the retrieved material. And in order to retrieve it, we used the sequences, because there are not many in the world, actually, not yet. We used the machines from the Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, who are experimenting with DNA as well, synthetic DNA and storage on DNA. And with the people from that department, we were able to retrieve the data and use the retrieved ones and zeros, the binary form, in the projection of this footage.
Thank you. There's a question from Tamara Keffer. Apologies if I've pronounced your name incorrectly. Is there a scientific publication available yet on the project, or might there be one to come?
So not yet, as we said, it's very recent, and we just completed the project and launched it last end of September. So yeah, we're doing now a sort of roadshow with this project. We've been presenting at Fiat IFTA here. We'll be presenting at EMIA, US-based association for archivists. And that will be next week. And indeed, we hope to be publishing on the topic. That will certainly come in the course of next year, hopefully.
Yeah, and we see that people, but also media, still are interested in it, because tomorrow morning here in Australia, 7:30, I'll be in an interview with ABC again about this topic. So media is still interested. It's, again, what Yasmin said, it's sort of magic. People don't really understand what's going on, and it's almost impossible to store it on this little grain of sand, the size of a grain of sand, and yet it's happening. So I think it's still early days indeed, and we will need scientific partners, more scientific partners. That's also the reason that we want to connect and will connect within that alliance, the DNA Data Storage Alliance, with organizations like the JPEG Committee, in order to create standards. And that's the start of the, let's say, more scientific approach as well. To get a standard that is measurable and can be used by other organizations at a later stage.
Another question from my colleague, Albert Vahar. How secure is storing DNA, and what can influence the quality of the DNA storage?
Yeah.
So,
For you.
It's incredibly stable. You could see the little cylinders, Albert. We use cylinders. There are more ways to store it. You can use it in glass and in silica, but we used the cylinders because it was easy transportable. Because after all, it had to be mailed the old-fashioned way, still, with an envelope, really. During COVID, took a bit more time. We had to transport it from California to both Lausanne and Sydney. But it's incredibly stable. Actually, you can just put it on the shelf, and if you, let's say, make sure that it's not above 100 degrees Celsius or below -100, it will be okay. And that's really the case. It's very stable. So in normal conditions, you can keep this for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. when we had this media event, you saw the images of the projection on the Sydney Opera House, where we presented the results of the pilot to the media. There were some people involved from the AOC, the Australian Olympic Committee, the Sydney Opera House, of course, NFSA. Even the minister our minister for culture and arts was involved, and a few other people. And people wanted to make a nice picture with this cylinder, because it was sort of the magic of there's a whole video clip in this little cylinder. Someone dropped it and thought, okay, this is the end of this DNA, but you can just drop it. Nothing happens. It's stable. It's very stable. And I think that at the end of the day is maybe even, well, density, of course, is crucial. I mean, storing so much data in such a small surface helps us to deal with the issues in terms of square meters and storage, but also in terms of energy costs. I mean, we don't need cooling anymore. You don't need electricity. You can just store it in a safe environment, and you'll be safe for hundreds or maybe again thousands of years.
A further question from Toba from Brunsmuseet. Will it be possible to have such a storage to grow by itself?
Like biology can grow.
Mimicry. Yeah.
Biomimicry. Yeah. No, I think it's about cells. So you work with cells. It is biology indeed, but you work with cells. You inject the DNA. You inject the synthetic DNA in the cells that are made by the bioscience partner. That's where the real magic happens, by the way. And no one knows exactly what's going on, because again, that's protected knowledge. It's patented. It won't grow in itself because it's still an isolated number of cells that contain the data, and in an isolated way, structured in a vial, in a safe cylinder, and so on. So unless you cook it, maybe then weird things happen. But again, if you don't do that, it will remain the same for thousands of years.
And a question from Michael Popham. Do you foresee any ethical concerns, for example, the legal right to be forgotten, particularly around the difficulty of rewriting DNA?
Oh, that's a very good question indeed. Though I don't think it is really different from any issues of preserving contents in general, whatever the support is. Here we are proposing or investigating a way to store and to preserve data for at lower cost with lower space, but as much as we are now trying also to preserve our data forever on less sustainable support. So I think the theme of the data protection remains whatever the supports we are investigating.
Great. Thank you both. I think that's the end of our questions. So I'd like to offer Jan and Yasmin a very virtual round of applause and say thank you very much for this excellent and very interesting presentation. Oh, wait, one more question has just arrived, sorry, from Craig Dingwall. Would you make multiple copies in different locations to address disaster recovery?
Yeah, Craig is one of my dear colleagues. So it will be your office, Craig. You will see that all the cylinders will be stored there. No, but without jokes here, the fact that it's stable and that you can easily multiply them is an interesting way for backup solutions and multiple copies indeed. So of that little cylinder that you saw on one of these slides, we made, Yasmin, I think 10 copies, wasn't it? 5 for each party or 6 for each party. And you can do that easily. It's just one run. It's the same DNA base that you can easily copy. So yeah, it's easy, reproducible, and you can make as many if you want. So yeah, that's another advantage.
Wonderful. Thank you again both for such a very exciting and interesting presentation. In particular, thank you, Jan, for joining us after midnight your time.
Yeah, thank you.